Hello and welcome, friends, to the latest episode of this podcast series where I've been sharing a favorite poem with you every day. The poem I'm going to read today is by Mary Ruefle, and the poem is called The Hand. Mary Ruefle is a contemporary American poet, a well known American poet. I'll read the poem first. The Hand. The teacher asks a question. You know the answer, you suspect. You are the only one in the classroom who knows the answer, because the person in question is yourself, and on that you are the greatest living authority. But you don't raise your hand. You raise the top of your desk to take out an apple. You look out the window. You don't raise your hand, and there is some essential beauty in your fingers, which aren't even drumming, but lie flat and peaceful. The teacher repeats the question. Outside the window, on an overhanging branch, a robin is ruffling its feathers, and spring is in the air. Just see how the poem begins. The teacher asks a question. First line, we know there is a teacher. You know the answer. We know there is us involved, or me involved, or you involved, whatever. There is a receptor of the question involved, which in this case is us. The poet brings us in the poem, the reader in the poem. You know the answer, you suspect. You are the only one in the classroom who knows the answer. So in the third line, we know that this is all happening inside a classroom, which we would have been suspecting by the time we are in the second line, that this is all happening inside a classroom. Who knows the answer? By the time we are in the fifth line, because the person, this is how the fourth line ends, in question is yourself. We now know there is something deeper going on here. It is not, this is where it suddenly gets poetic, because the person in question is yourself, and on that you are the greatest living authority. But you don't raise your hand. And then the poem progresses. You take out an apple, look out of the window. There is some essential beauty in your fingers, which aren't even drumming. So this poem is all about not doing, the lack of action, inaction. This is a poem about just letting go, relaxing, and looking outside the window. And at the end, we know that outside the window, on an overhanging branch, a robin is ruffling its feathers, and spring is in the air. So this poem sets certain expectations and then breaks it. Sets certain expectations and then breaks it. I like this poem precisely because of this. And even in its meandering, it is so precise. It is so well constructed. This is something that we all can do in our attempts to write poetry. Try writing on something and then slowly change the subject. Let what the poem being about, you started writing it about, let that take a back seat. Let the entire poem be about something else altogether, or in the process, even if it is about something else, it should come together. Like, here the teacher asks a question, but at the end we know that the teacher repeats the question towards the end again. But we know that it kind of ridicules the idea that teacher has been asking the question. You know the answer, and that gives you a certain level of confidence. Whether you know the answer is also suspected. We don't really know whether the reader in question here really knows the answer. It might be just a whim on which the entire poem is constructed. So there is that unreliable narrator involved in this poem, who keeps on playing with our expectations, and this makes this poem so good. There's another poem I want to share with you. This poem is by Denver Butson. This poem is called Tuesday, 9 a.m. Denver Butson's poem, Tuesday, 9 a.m. A man standing at the bus stop reading the newspaper is on fire. Flames are peeking out from beneath his collar and cuffs. His shoes have begun to melt. The woman next to him wants to mention it to him that he is burning, but she is drowning. Water is everywhere, in her mouth and ears, in her eyes. A stream of water runs steadily from her blouse. Another woman stands at the bus stop, freezing to death. She tries to stand near the man who is on fire, to try to melt the icicles that have formed on her eyelashes and on her nostrils. to stop her teeth long enough from chattering to say something to the woman who is drowning. But the woman who is freezing to death has trouble moving with blocks of ice on her feet. It takes the three some time to board the bus, what with the flames and water and ice. But when they finally climb the stairs and take their seats, the driver doesn't even notice that none of them has paid because he is tortured by visions and is wondering if the man who got off at the last stop was really being mauled to death by wild dogs. The last stanza kind of takes off in takes us in a completely different domain. It takes the three some time to board the bus, what with the flames and water and ice. But when they finally climb the stairs and take their seats, the driver doesn't even notice that none of them has paid because he is tortured by visions and is wondering if the man who got off at the last stop was really being mauled to death by wild dogs. See how this poem plays out. It talks about different characters, and there are certain things happening to them, and there is no respite. It does not lead to anything. The story just progresses. There's one man, then there's another woman, then there is it is something that Aristotle will advise you against. In Aristotle, Aristotle in his Poetics famously says that cause effect is the only way a story can progress. One thing should lead to other. There should be a hence therefore narrative. Here there is nothing like that. It is an and narrative. Man and woman drowning, and woman on who is freezing to death, and they board the bus, and something else happens, and the poem ends. But in the process, this poem works simply because of the fact that here the world, the inside world of those people are being spoken about. The poet is using his poetic device to not just talk about the what he's making it seem visual, that it is a real thing, but the man on the reading his newspaper is on fire is a internal phenomenon. It is something that the man is feeling. Similarly, the woman who is drowning is feeling that she is drowning. She is not actually drowning, but the poet visualizes it. Just like in the last poem, the guy who knows the answer does not, or in this case the reader, you who knows the answer, does not even care to answer the question. It is very similar to that. So such poems where you take away the narrative works when there is a the outside world and the inside world merge. Only then this kind of narrative starts to make sense. There's one last poem I want to share, and with this I'll end today's episode. This is I have read many of his poems in the past. Billy Collins, my favorite contemporary poet. This poem is called Grave. Very Billy Collins style poem. Grave. I'll not say anything about the poem. You will appreciate what I've just said when you listen to this poem. Grave. What do you think of my new glasses? I asked as I stood under a shade tree before the joined grave of my parents. And what followed was a long silence that descended on the rows of the dead and on the fields and the woods beyond. One of the 100 kinds of silence, according to the Chinese belief, each one distinct from the others, and the differences being so faint that only a few special monks were able to tell them apart. They make you look very scholarly, I heard my mother say. Once I lay down on the ground and pressed an ear into the soft grass. Then I rolled over and pressed my other ear to the ground, the ear my father likes to speak into. But he would say nothing, and I could not find a silence among the 100 Chinese silences that would fit the one that he created, even though I was the one who had just made up the business of the 100 Chinese silences. the silence of the night boat and the silence of the lotus, cousin to the silence of the temple bell, only deeper and softer, like petals at its farthest edges. At its farthest edges. There's another poem by Billy Collins where he has, which I had read also in one of the previous episodes, No Time, where he has spoken about the cemetery. No time. In a rush this weekday morning, I tap the horn as I speed past the cemetery, where my parents lie buried, side by side under a smooth slab of granite. Then, all day long, I think of him rising up to give me that look of knowing disapproval, while my mother calmly tells him to lie back down. So you don't really know what this silence is all about. His father's silence is not the is where the story ends. Across his poems, we see that a character, a personality of his father emerges. In this poem, No Time, his father gives him that knowing look of knowing disapproval. In this poem, his father creates a silence which is not one of the 100 silences that the Chinese believe in. This is something altogether different. So we don't know. The poem throws us unanswered questions. We don't know what the father wants to say about his new glasses, and that's the whole point. It doesn't matter. We don't know what in Denver Butson's poem, what these people are individually going through. Is he really? What happens to the man who is burning, or what happens to the woman who is drowning? We don't know what the question is in Mary Ruffles' poem that he knew the answer to and didn't care raising his hands. We really don't know, and that is the whole point. That not knowing, admittance of that not knowing is where the poetry lies. So this is something that you can attempt. We can attempt as aspiring poets. We can try and write something where the central plot of the story is slowly let go, and something else much larger, much deeper emerges. It is something that we can try. I'm not saying that you have to write something like this, but the point is that this is a way of writing a poem. Just like in the past classes we discussed how a poem can end, or how a poem tends to begin. This is one of the way a poem is shaped, where the central plot is let go. A poem is not an essay which has a specific begin, middle and end. It can be anything. It can be any piece of writing which it can be like an epiphanic moment, as James Joyce uses the word epiphany, a moment of great knowledge where something much larger than a moment is revealed. So it can be an epiphanic moment. It can be a journey which just meanders into different places. It can be a small incident which leads to a much larger message. So, and this is what we see in these poems, so yeah, I really like these poems and I wanted to share them with you. Thank you for being a part of today's discussion. Take care and stay safe. We'll meet again tomorrow with a new poet and a new poem. Thank you so much.